You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 7th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, stocks dive in Asia as China hits back. We'll hear from Beijing on how the country plans to retaliate against Trump's tariffs. Israel's leader heads to Washington today. We'll examine the agenda for Netanyahu's meeting at the White House and ask if Bibi's talent for self-preservation can prevail. We'll cross to Sao Paulo to hear about the renovation of a central park, and we'll get an update on the Australian elections. Then we'll go on manoeuvres in Finland.
The baseline is that we have to have a maritime picture. That's what we're doing by radars and cameras and also the vessels and the airplanes and submarines.
Our Helsinki correspondent joins Operation Baltic Sentry. We'll have a quick roundup of news from Asia and a rustle through the front pages, and then our Europe editor will walk us through what to expect at Salone del Mobile, which begins in Milan tomorrow. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Major stock indexes plunged in Asia today as White House officials showed no sign of backing away from their sweeping tariff plans. And investors wagered the mounting risk of recession could see US interest rates cut as early as May. Australia's opposition Liberal Party announced today that they have abandoned a plan to force government workers to return to the office full-time as incumbent Labour gained in polls ahead of a May the 3rd election. And South Korea's cabinet is set to finalise a June the 3rd date for a presidential election following the removal of Yoon Suk-yeol last week for his short-lived martial law declaration. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, China has hit back on the 54% tariffs imposed on it by the United States by retaliating with tariffs of its own, adding 34% to the tariff on all US goods from the 10th of April, sending markets in Asia into a spin. Well, I'm joined now by Megan Morris, who's Singapore Deputy Bureau Chief of Business Insider. Megan, many thanks for coming on the programme in a very, very busy day for the Asian markets. Can you just give us a start by giving us the opening figures on those Asian markets today?
Yes, the big picture here, and thank you for having me, is bad news across the board. We saw red everywhere. Now, a little bit of this, I will give you the caveat, was a bit of catch up. Taiwan's markets, for example, had been closed on Thursday and Friday. So this is the first time that we're seeing investors really react to Wednesday's tariffs and the global market chaos that followed. China was similarly closed, as was Indonesia on Friday. That said, once all these markets opened from Japan to Indo to China, there was red across the board in gold, in major market indexes. It has been a very, very bad day in Asia, and it does not look set to get any better, at least in the few hours left of our trading day here in Singapore.
I wonder if you could explain how the ground rules for the US-China trade relationship will actually change.
Yes, it seems here like both sides are really digging in. So rather than opening up diplomatic channels and trying to come to some sort of agreement, we see retaliatory tariffs on top of retaliatory tariffs. The diplomatic channels seem really frozen right now. So we haven't heard anything about a call between Trump and Xi to maybe hash things out or find some kind of a deal, as Trump loves to do. So until then, it looks like we will continue to have a series of escalating tariffs. China is in no mood to back down now, with 34% tariffs announced on Friday that mirror the US's measures. China is calling the US a unilateral bully. That doesn't seem like language that's likely to change anytime soon.
And which sectors will suffer most from this?
This is a huge hit across the board in Asia to manufacturing. We see big hubs like Vietnam, China, Japan, et cetera, really targeted. And these are important parts of the supply chain from the manufacturers that produce parts that go into the machines that make your Nike sneakers, et cetera, to those that do the finishing. Think Taiwan and its role in semiconductor chips that are in everything from your refrigerator to your smartphone. So we will see huge losses in manufacturing. We're seeing tech stocks react because of that. But we will probably see pain across the board, unfortunately, from agriculture to tourism. This is not good news for really any sector right now.
And of course, in the US, agriculture is going to particularly hurt. And those are Trump's heartland supporters. Is he in danger here of losing that?
That is a great point. And China's tariffs, even in months prior to this, speak to that. In March, Beijing targeted American agriculture specifically with tariffs on U.S. soybeans, pork and beef imports, and chicken and cotton. So there were very clear hits to Trump's voting base. Now, Trump, big picture, has acknowledged some of the pain that comes both from agriculture and from this broader market sell-off. He told reporters last night on Sunday night that he acknowledges the pain, but sometimes you have to just take the medicine to fix it. And he says the medicine in this case is this wide-ranging set of tariffs. His agriculture secretary is also doubling down on these tariffs, saying that these were created by some of the smartest people that she's worked with. The Trump administration is preparing some kinds of relief packages for farmers, but whether that will be enough to offset all of these hits is far from certain right now.
What do you make of the timing of China's reciprocal announcement, given that it came, as you said, at the end of the day on Friday? It was a holiday. There'd been the markets in China and Hong Kong and Taiwan had been shut. Was that a deliberate ploy to just delay things for as long as possible?
I think it could be. I think that it was also a way to shock European markets so that people paid attention to this first thing in Europe and then in the US. China has always been very strategic about these tariffs. Some are announced right when the U.S. go into effect. But here we saw the tariff announcement from China precede the actual turnaround from the U.S. in terms of when the U.S. would turn on these tariffs. So I do think it was a little bit strategic and maybe trying to keep their own populace's mind off of these tariffs going into the weekend. China has been long focused, even outside of these tariffs, on trying to get their own domestic consumption up. So I think that they're very keen to avoid worrying consumers as they try to spur people to buy new phones and clothes and things like that to help their markets at home.
And how important is the US market to China? I mean, doesn't it actually do more business with the EU and Britain?
This, I think, is a very big strategic market in terms of messaging. China has a lot to gain here by pointing out that the U.S. is a bully and perhaps by increasing its popularity with the EU and some of its other markets. So China's round of tariffs here and as earlier may not just be financial. The country is also signaling to some of its very important trading partners, as including those you highlighted, that it is ready to do business and that it won't take the U.S. tariffs just lying down. So I think that this is a big game of chess, and we are still very early on in the game. I mean,
could we see China cutting the U.S. out of the loop entirely as it increases trade with the West?
I think that that's unlikely. The U.S. is a really key both supplier of and buyer of electronics and parts that go into these electronics. China would be really crippled if right now or tomorrow the U.S. turned off all imports and exports. There's really no way for China to make some of its key components in its electronic supply chain, especially semiconductor chips. That said, it's been on a years-long quest to improve and make that supply chain more autonomous and to centralize that within China. So it would be fairly impossible from a political unrest standpoint for China, because this would mean millions of people out of work, the people who put together iPhones and things like that. And what China wants to avoid always is that kind of political unrest that could see widespread demonstrations and an otherwise angry populace.
So Vietnam and Cambodia, both countries which make components for goods made in China, have also had huge tariffs placed on them. So one US company that relies heavily on these places is Apple. And the head of the company, Tim Cook, has been trying to keep Trump on side. I wonder how this can be navigated from Apple's point of view.
I think this could end up being a masterclass, for better or for worse, in diplomacy from a CEO. Tim Cook is walking a very, very difficult line here because he needs to keep China happy and find some way to keep or to make Trump happier. Apple took a huge hit last week in terms of its stock price and market capitalization. So I think the biggest question going into this earnings season on many investors' minds is, what is Apple going to do to turn this around? I'm not sure Tim Cook has any answers, but this is a really key region for Apple, both as an exporting market as well as for domestic consumption. Apple has been trying to work with countries across Asia to increase sales of iPhones and things like that. And this last week will not make that push any easier.
And speaking of tech, ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, confirmed discussions on the sale of the business to a US company are ongoing. We know that this has been kicked down the road several times. If it's resolved, could it avoid a trade war between the world's two biggest economies?
Here it depends on how much you would like to take Trump at his word. He says that he offered TikTok a delay, so the company has another 75 days to sort itself out. But he says that if China bites, there could be some kind of change in tariffs. It's unclear how serious Beijing takes that kind of statement and how it would affect ByteDance's willingness or not to sell or to engage with potential US buyers here.
Megan, thank you very much indeed. That was Singapore Deputy Bureau Chief of Business Insider, Megan Morris there. And this is The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Now, for 40 years, Israel and the US have had a free trade deal ensuring that about 98% of US goods enter Israel tax-free. Well, despite Israel's recent move to cancel remaining tariffs on US imports, Washington is slapping a 17% tariff on the country. This will be just one of the items on the agenda when Benjamin Netanyahu meets Donald Trump at the White House today. Well, I'm joined now by Yossi Meckelberg, who's a senior consulting fellow at Chatham House. Yossi, very many thanks for joining us today. I wonder how these tariffs are reciprocal if Israel doesn't impose any tariffs at all on the US.
Good morning, Georgina. I think Israel is not in a position to reciprocate for this imposing of tariffs. Israel was quite surprised that the United States imposed 17%. According to some estimates, it will cost Israel around $2.3 billion a year, with the loss of between 18,000 to 26,000 jobs. This is massive, especially in the middle of a war, in the middle of an economic crisis as a result of so many young people serving in reserve and an economic slowdown as a result. Israel tried to preempt it by removing all tariffs on U.S. goods just before Netanyahu announced his tariffs policy, but it didn't seem to help. But we have to see what happened in the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, whether again that Trump says something and then he retracts.
Of course, that's just one of the things that will come up in the meeting today. Another pressing issue will be Iran. What's likely to arise around that?
Again, in the kind of, we are living in 3 months that's sometimes more intense than the full 4 years of an American administration. So if it's not tariff on Greenland, on Canada or something, also the issue of Iran, which immediately Trump threatened that unless Iran is entering into negotiation, probably it would use military force to eliminate its nuclear program. We see some build-up in the Gulf and in other places, military build-up by the United States, so allowing it at least the option. But the Iranians are not quick to return to the negotiation table. One, I think, is because they don't necessarily believe that Trump is going to do that. B, they say it was the United States who withdrew from the JCPOA, the agreement on nuclear, back when in the first Trump administration in 2018. They need to go back to that or make the first move in terms of concessions. So there is a bit of a standoff between the two. But from military point of view, the advantage is with the United States. But for a president that said that he wants to have a term without wars, I think the first one to conduct in Iran not necessarily will bring him the Nobel Peace Prize very soon.
I wonder if you could bring us up to speed about events in Gaza over the last couple of days. So we know that the IDF has admitted soldiers made mistakes over the killing of 15 emergency workers back on the 23rd of March. Just unpick that for us.
Yeah, usually there is a first denial, then try to soften it, then eventually admission. I think, of course, nothing justified and needs to be investigated closely. What was the mistake there when you find, people buried the way that these people were, paramedics were buried. But beyond this is the longer Israel is entrenched into a never-ending war in Gaza, we unfortunately probably will see more of this. Why? Because, yes, mistakes happen. Sometimes soldiers take liberties. The long service doesn't do anything either to their morale or to their discipline. And there is gradually erosion in not only in discipline, but the way they looked at everyone that is there, also an element of fear. Nothing, of course, justifies it. And we saw it in so many wars that dragged on forever. But right now, the war is about saving Netanyahu and keeping him in power. It has very little to do with any security or strategic interest. So we'll see more of that. We saw last week that the defense minister, Israel Katz, was talking about expanding the operation there, taking more part of Gaza, which is a tiny place anyway, creating another corridor that cut between Rafah and Khan Yunis, which means if this continues like this, Israel plans to stay in the long term in Gaza.
And just finally, quickly, Yossi, I wonder if this visit by Netanyahu signals ongoing US support, or is there a chance that he will get the Zelensky treatment?
That's a very interesting question, which I think we'll see later today. But because it was a surprise, Netanyahu was in Hungary. We know because of the ICC arrest warrant, he has to take a very long route to get to the United States. And the assumption is talked mainly about tariffs. But as we know, Trump can surprise, and he might give him a Zelensky treatment about Gaza, but it might be exactly the opposite. I think we'll have to wait and see.
Yossi Meckelberg, thank you very much indeed. This is The Globalist. Well, it's a very busy news day, and joining me to unpack more of these stories is Simon Brooke, who's a journalist and a communications consultant. No shortage of headlines for us to dive into today,
Absolutely,
Simon.
Yeah, real choice, yeah.
Let's start with the FT, though, because they're anticipating Pete Hegseth's visit to Panama. And, of course, we know the background to this. Trump threatened to take it because of Chinese influence.
Absolutely, yes. So Pete Hegseth, as you say, the US Defense Secretary, will meet the Panamanian President José Raúl Mulino tomorrow. And yeah, the paper reminds us that, as you say, Trump's repeatedly threatened to retake control of the canal, which handles around 5% of global maritime trade. And you think of the problems facing the world economy at the moment, that is a pretty significant percentage. So the administration, Trump's argument is that because the company that has the concession for 2 ports on either end of the canal are held by a conglomerate, this is CK Hutchinson, and the conglomerate is based in Hong Kong, there's a national security risk, obviously, from China. Meanwhile, according to the FT, an investor group led by BlackRock, which is the world's biggest asset manager, has offered to buy CK Hutchinson's ports division in a deal worth nearly $30 billion. But according to the FT, the Chinese authorities are still reviewing the transaction, casting doubt on whether it will be completed. According to the Pentagon, this is part of ongoing efforts to strengthen our partnerships with Panama and other Central American nations towards our shared vision for a peaceful and secure Western Hemisphere. I have to say, I'm not so sure about that. And there'll be many people in South America who might question that. I have to say, to me, it looks like something to do with something about a distraction, really. Looking at, as I say, the effect on the world stock exchange, on the world economy that Trump's tariffs have created, and concerns in the country, in the US itself, about the effect on ordinary people's savings and things. I think it's this classic manoeuvre where you look externally, and of course, Trump is the expert on attention grabbing, isn't he? So I think that's probably more to do with it.
And it's interesting that the FT picks up on an NBC News report from last month that the White House had directed the Pentagon to draw up plans to potentially increase US troop presence in Panama, including an option for American soldiers to seize the waterway by force.
Well, I mean, how likely that is, we don't know. But then you consider what the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself has said about Canada, about Greenland. I mean, it looks like geographically nothing is off the agenda, really, isn't it? Anything is a possibility. And I think it just shows, in a way, Trump's view of the world, that this makes great television, as he said about his row with Vladimir Zelensky. What he's really thinking about is grabbing the headlines. And as I say, I think with the problems he's facing internally, this is a welcome or an attempted distraction.
Well, of course, another distraction, and something that he has certainly got the headlines on, is the fact that he's trying to have a third term. The New York Times has a great analysis piece on this.
Yeah, exactly. So the question is, as the New York Times says, this would defy the Constitution and test democracy. The 22nd Amendment is clear. The paper reminds us Donald Trump has to give up office after his second term. But again, it's interesting how he gets this debate going. And according to the New York Times, more at any time in generations, a president's commitments to the limits on power and the rule of law is under question. And his critics fear that the country is on a dark path. And the paper puts this into context, reminding us that Trump called for the overturning of the 2020 election, despite losing it, and later called for the termination, as he described it, of the Constitution so that he could return to the White House with a new election. According to the New York Times, members of the administration have been sort of joking a little bit about it. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi, was on Fox News on Sunday saying, I wish we could have him for 20 years as our president, but I think he's going to be finished probably after this. And of course, the question is, the finishing is obviously, should be in the hands of the electorate if they vote against him.
Well, the electorate have been taking action this weekend, particularly on Saturday. We saw marches across American cities. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, so the CNN, The Guardian, various other papers reporting, news outlets reporting that Saturday saw the biggest day of demonstrations yet against President Trump. This in particular by an opposition movement beginning to regain its momentum after the shock of the US president's first weeks in office, according to The Guardian. This group is called Hands Off, and yes, it said it held demonstrations at around 1,200 locations in all 50 states, and there were 150 groups, according to The Guardian. This is civil rights organisations, labour unions, LGBTQ plus advocates, veterans and election activists. And I think this is really interesting, really powerful picture in The Guardian of somebody wearing a balaclava and sunglasses, which makes great pictures. But I have to wonder, as somebody who's worked in politics for many years, what effect that will have on ordinary voters. The question is, can this kind of angry, photogenic, if you like, demonstration by this particular group then be translated into votes by people across the country? And of course, more importantly, for those of us who want to see Trump out of office, whether the Democrats can actually pick up on this, find a candidate, find a message, and then find a way of opposing Trump effectively.
And one man who looks like he's going to position himself to be a candidate is Cory Booker. After he gave that 25-hour-plus speech, he's been urging action in his first event since then. He took a version of it on the road to town hall meeting in New Jersey. You've also got Obama. He's called on, obviously he can't run again, although if Trump changes the Constitution...
Why not? That was the question. Yeah.
He's called on Americans to defend democratic values in the face of Trump. So, we are seeing action there. Another place we're seeing action on the streets is France. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so Politico is reporting that Marine Le Pen and her party organised a rally. This is following the court the judgment earlier last week, which sentenced her to an immediate 5-year ban from running for office, which will almost make it impossible for her to stand in the next presidential election in 2027. And this is for embezzling funds from the European Parliament. So she organised this big rally, and they were anticipating something around 5,000 to 8,000 people to attend. Jordan Bardella, her number 2, said that there will be 10,000 present, but according to Politico.eu, who was actually at the rally, even though it was a lovely sunny day, there weren't that many people there. And I think this is interesting because it follows on from polling that was shown last week that are deep concerns about this, and that the French are really unhappy about their political system, but still a large majority of them think that this court case was right, that the judge made the right decision in this case. So where does that leave Marine Le Pen and her National Rally Party? Well, will Jordan Bardella stand? But then at the age of, 27 or whatever, he's probably a bit too young. But it does seem to have thrown very much the extreme right in France into confusion.
And finally, if you have a spare £20,000, here is what sounds like a wonderful treat.
Yeah, according to the Times, the Royal Scotsman train service has collaborated with Dior to create a 3-night wellness retreat. This is a 3-night retreat on one of Scotland's most scenic routes. But as you say, it will cost... Well, it says it costs £20,000. And to be honest, some of the prices I've been charged on British Railways, rather, that's small change. But anyway, Belmont, the luxury travel operator and the owner of the Royal Scotsman, has plush Edwardian interiors in this train. It's collaborated, as I say, with Dior. And this follows the opening of a spa carriage in 2023. So I'm not sure to what extent you'll be engaging in these luxurious activities on the train and to what extent you get off and do them. But I have to say, the idea of being sort of thrown around a train carriage trying to do Pilates or as somebody tries to give you a facial, I think seems a bit pointless. And in a way, isn't the point about a train travel that it's simplicity? You've got a book, you've got a cup of coffee, you look out of the window and just gaze and think, this passing scenery and think about the world rather than all these activities. It's slightly missing the point, isn't it? Or is
I don't know. I mean, I love trains. I love
here.
Scotland, and I love spas.
Right. Well, there you
and
go.
Pilates.
Here's 20,000 quid, Georgina. Enjoy.
I think that actually that sounds like heaven to me. Simon, thank you very much indeed. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Major stock indexes plunged in Asia today as White House officials showed no sign of backing away from their sweeping tariff plans. And investors wagered the mounting risk of recession could see US interest rates cut as early as May. The size and disruptive impact of US trade policies, if sustained, would be sufficient to tip a still healthy US and global expansion into recession, said Bruce Kassman, who's head of economics at JP Morgan, putting the risk of a downturn at 60%. Australia's opposition Liberal Party announced today that they've abandoned a plan to force government workers to return to the office full-time, as incumbent Labour gained in polls ahead of a May the 3rd election. Working from home emerged as an election battleground last month after the Liberal Party said it would bar hundreds of thousands of government employees from doing so in a bid to boost productivity. And it's been reported that South Korea's cabinet is expected to finalise a June the 3rd date for a presidential election, following the removal of Yoon Suk-yeol last week for his short-lived martial law declaration. Although not required by law, the cabinet will make the decision at a meeting on Tuesday, as it needs to approve a holiday for the event. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. And now for a closer look behind the news. Here's the journalist Brian Harris on the Central Park of Brazil's São Paulo.
Ibirapuera is São Paulo's answer to New York's Central Park. Once a swampy wetland far from the historical centre, the 158-hectare park has matured alongside Latin America's largest city and now finds itself ensconced among the high-rises. Look out the window as you come in to land at the city's Congonhas airport, and Ibirapuera appears as an island of green in a sea of grey. In a metropolitan area that has more than 20 million people and precious few green spaces, the park is an oasis for Paulistanos. But tensions are brewing within Ibirapuera's tree-lined borders. Almost 5 years after a private company took over management of the park, as part of a concession agreement with the city government, residents are unhappy with developments. This despite the considerable investments made in Ibirapuera during this period. New restaurants, bathroom facilities, sports grounds, you name it. Still, concessionaire Urbia has been criticised for privatising what should be public space. And unfortunately for the company, its most outspoken critic is a São Paulo public prosecutor. In a formal complaint late last month, Silvio Marques lambasted the park's management for, quote, transforming it into an open-air shopping centre with exclusive spaces for companies that can pay a fee or rent. He went on to not only criticise the excessive exposure of brands and the sale of alcoholic beverages, but even threatened to bring criminal charges against the concessionaire Urbia. It seems the prosecutor was most riled by the creation of a co-working space in the park by local neobank Nubank. In his missive, Marques raised the possibility of the park's concession being revoked. That would be a mistake. Ibirapuera today is a park that rivals the world's greatest. This was simply not the case 5 years ago. Before the concession, the park was rather shabby, to put it mildly. Food options were limited, bathrooms dilapidated, and amenities few and far between. The transformation since then has been astounding. Today, Ibirapuera is one of São Paulo's few bona fide tourist attractions, with a number of restaurants, cafes, and even a sunset bar to enjoy a shopping. Ibirapuera is packed these days, and that speaks volumes. If visitors would like a reminder of what could have been, they only need to cross the street to the Ayrton Senna Plaza, which is maintained by the city government. Broken pavements and peeling paintwork, Ibirapuera has left all that behind. For Monocle, in São Paulo, I'm Brian Harris.
Thank you, Brian. For more from Monocle's editors and correspondents around the world, do sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. Following several incidents of alleged sabotage, the NATO military alliance announced in January that it would step up patrols and monitoring in the Baltic Sea in order to protect critical undersea cables and pipelines. As part of this operation called Baltic Sentry, the United States sent a group of Marine Corps soldiers to Finland to boost naval monitoring. We dispatched our Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsoff to follow their work.
United States Marine Corps soldiers are getting ready to fly out an RQ-20 Puma drone at the Upiniemi Naval Base in southern Finland.
Can they just recover on the boat? Yes, yeah. We can just bring it down right by them.
This group of 40 Marines is part of NATO's Baltic Sentry program, which was launched in January following several incidents of sabotage against critical undersea infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. Baltic Sentry sees NATO's warships, submarines and aircraft patrol and monitor the waters of the region. The US Marines are in Finland in order to help the NATO allies achieve a better understanding of the vessels traversing the Baltic Sea, as Major Martin Harris explains.
So what has been happening since February is our Finnish partners and allies here are queuing radar signals. So they're able to reach out into the Baltic and see all the vessels that are traveling and traversing through the Baltic. And what they'll do is they will be able to match all the information data that is available to a specific vessel. Now, what is that information? It may be manifests that are on that vessel, where that vessel has come from or where it's supposed to be going to. And by doing that, they're able to see maybe an anomaly of a vessel in a location that maybe it shouldn't be on its course, and then it needs further inspection. So then that's when they'll present that information to our Marines, and the Marines will then either fly a UAS Puma out and get visual recognition or collect more data, either electronic or visual data, and transmit that back through the Finnish Navy headquarters and then up to Allied Maritime Command in Northwood. And then at that point, then it gives a greater picture of all of the vessels, what they're doing, what they could be doing, and it also helps prevent a vessel that is maybe having an emergency or it's off course, or maybe it needs help. Maybe its radios are down. Maybe we need to queue some emergency vehicles or some rescue to it.
Prop, and then there's only 2 control panels that we control besides the thrust. It's this guy here. Stab.
Since Baltic Sentry was launched, no further incidents of sabotage have occurred in the region. Major Harris cannot go into the specifics as they are classified, but admits that the Marines' aircraft have approached several suspicious vessels near the Finnish coast.
Well, I can't talk about the numbers specifically of how many and what types of those vessels. I can tell you that there have been vessels that we wanted to find out more information about and that were potentially in the wrong area or didn't have all their information in the right systems for us to know exactly what they were doing. And we have gone out and collected lots and lots of data about those specific vessels.
Vähän pidemmältä matkalta niin sanotusti seurantaan ja ilmoitettu sitten tonne rannikot tai.
These American soldiers work together with their Finnish counterparts who are conscripts doing their mandatory military service at the Upiniemi base. In addition to the monitoring activity that takes place here and the day-to-day surveillance and patrolling of its maritime areas that Finland has always done, the country has recently dispatched PGG Hango, a fast attack-capable missile vessel, to work under NATO's command as part of Baltic Sentry. Even with such an enhanced presence, NATO cannot cover all the nearly 400,000 square kilometers of the Baltic Sea, as Marko Laaksonen from the Finnish Navy explains.
I'm Captain Navy Marko Laaksonen and Deputy Chief of Staff Operation of Finnish Navy.
I mean, obviously you cannot be present in every corner of the Baltic Sea, in every centimeter. I suppose you have to identify some risk areas where you are more present than in other areas. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. There are a lot of critical infra in the bottom of the Baltic Sea, and we have to make assessments which is very critical for the nations, and we concentrate on those areas. The baseline is that we have to have a maritime picture all over the area, and that's what we're doing by radars and cameras and also the vessels and the airplanes and submarines. So if we know what's going on in the Baltic Sea area, which vessels are where, that's the baseline, and then we do the risk assessment, which vessels are the most critical for the infra, and then we try to send our vessels, our capabilities nearby. So.
And what goes into that risk assessment of a single vessel?
Well, there are a lot of factors. For instance, the ownership of the vessel, the port calls, where she has been or where she's heading to, what kind of cargo she has, these kind of things.
It's pretty light. It's a lightweight thing. So, or a lightweight.
For NATO, establishing a stronger and more visible presence in the Baltic Sea is also about projecting strength and deterring possible acts of sabotage by showing that its warships are present.
We are definitely more visible now, and we want to make us also to be seen. So we are actively calling the shadow fleet vessels, and we are sailing nearby and things like that. So that's one of the purpose of this Baltic Sentry, that we want to be more visible.
Going on right now, we have 2 Puma operators at the top of this building here. They're essentially controlling the Puma overhead.
For Monocle in Upiniemi, Finland, I'm Petri Burtsov.
Many thanks there to Petri. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's 16:40 in Sydney, 7:40 here in London. As we've been reporting in our headlines, Australia's Labour Party has announced a major U-turn. Liberal Party, I beg your pardon, announcing today that they have abandoned a plan to force government workers to return to the office full-time. With the May the 3rd election just weeks away and the polls very close, both major parties are punting their manifestos, including plans to address skyrocketing house prices and rental costs that have left many Australians struggling to find affordable homes. Well, I'm joined now by Nicole Gurran, who is Professor of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Sydney. Nicole, many thanks for joining us here on The Globalist. What would you say is the current state of the Australian election campaign?
Well, look, things are just getting started, but as you reported, certainly the election is shaping up to be one in which housing issues certainly come to the fore.
So, I mean, this is a major focus. Why are housing issues getting so much attention?
Look, like a lot of countries around the world, house prices over the past, decade or so, certainly longer than that, but it's really starting to be apparent now. Prices have risen so far ahead of wages. And to make matters worse, rents have been, galloping at astronomical rates as well, putting a lot of moderate income earners not only unable to access home ownership, but also unable to, secure an affordable rental within striking distance of where they work. To make matters worse, in Australia, we do have a private rental sector that's really meant only to be a transitional tenure. So you don't have long-term leases in Australia. 6 to 12 months is the norm. And even rental increases are very, are really largely to date have been left to the discretion of the landlord. So that leaves households in the private rental sector, which now is about a third of Australian households, in a very precarious and uncertain form of housing.
So what are the main differences between Labor and the Coalition's housing policies?
Look, unfortunately, if we assess the policies in terms of will either side really provide a structural solution to Australia's housing problem, you'd have to say neither of them will. The difference is probably one of tone. So the Coalition, which is the opposition government, they say they're about home ownership, and so their only policy, however, to support people into home ownership is to say that people should be able to access part of their superannuation savings, around $50,000, to help as a down payment towards a home. Now, the expert assessment of that is that that's counterproductive. That will only help push house prices further, and it does nothing for what we really need in Australia, which is new housing supply. The other platform, if you like, of the opposition just announced yesterday is to limit further international students coming to Australia. And again, that's a policy around perception rather than really fixing the housing issue, because certainly house prices in Australia rose very dramatically, more than they have actually in the past 12 months over the period of time when Australia's international borders were closed. So we know the housing problem isn't a simple issue of migration.
So
we turn to Labor. Oh, sorry, go on.
I'm just wondering what it is then that could really fix this.
Sure. And, unfortunately, we can't look at the party in government really to be offering a platform, although they are doing many of the things in small doses that we need. The big shift would be to reinvest in Australia in social and affordable housing. Up until the mid-90s, Australian governments paid for over 10% of new housing stock. They subsidised it, they're responsible for its construction, and that really helped not only provide affordable homes for people on very low incomes, but also actually helped moderate the market and made sure we had a pipeline of new supply. The other big ticket item in Australia would be tax reform. At the moment, we subsidise, we incentivise property investment that in the form of private individual landlords who get very generous tax benefits without any requirement to provide affordable homes and without that incentive even stimulating new rental supply. So addressing that, the very inefficient and very costly tax benefits, which again are helping push up the price of existing homes without delivering a pipeline of affordable new rental supply. Now that would be a structural solution.
Nicole, thank you very much indeed. That was Nicole Gurran there. You're with Monocle Radio. And it's time now to see the latest headlines out of Asia. Erin Cook, Jakarta-based journalist and author of Dari Mulut Ke Mulut, a newsletter about Southeast Asia, joins us now. Hello to you, Erin.
Hi, how are you?
Can you give us an update on on Myanmar and the fallout after the earthquake?
Yes, poor Myanmar. It's been it's just over a week now since the 7.7 earthquake hit just outside Mandalay, which is not the biggest city, but one of Myanmar's biggest cities, effectively shutting off communication for much of that time. We've just been told that the death toll's now pushing towards 4,000 as it shifts from a rescue mission to recovery mission, which is really, really sad, but expected, unfortunately, as the scale of disaster across the country becomes known. There are towns and smaller villages that have been effectively wiped out by this enormous earthquake. And this news is only coming through now. There's been effectively a media blackout for the first few days of the disaster. So this horrible news is starting to trickle through now.
And of course, they're not helped by the weather.
No, absolutely not. Expecting monsoonal rains in the next few days, which will only make matters worse. It's been a nightmare trying to get any sort of basics, water, food, medicine, as well as assistance, volunteers and other healthcare workers, that sort of thing, into the really affected areas. And this will make it 10 times harder.
Let's look at the big worldwide story and how the Asian papers are talking about tariff response.
Yes, it's been a disaster of a day across Asia, especially Southeast Asia, which is very overrepresented in the top 10, top 15 tariff-struck countries in the world. The big one is in Indonesia, where it's not one of Southeast Asia's worst affected, but fairly high up there with 34% tariffs. The rupiah this morning slid to an all-time low against the USD after poking the psychological point of 16,000 to $1 USD last week, which is where it was sat before the Asian financial crisis, which of course triggered the downfall of Suharto. So there's some historical ramifications here that worries Indonesia, and the government's come out very strongly and said, there's a bigger story going on here. We've got safe hands here now, so touch wood that they'll be able to get through it in the next few days. But yeah, it's across the entire region. In Singapore, which was fared fairly well with Trump's tariffs, it hit only 10%, which I think is the best case scenario for most countries. Even there, the stock market today has been shaken up quite badly. And similarly, the government stepped in to say, we could be much worse off, but we've got the safe hands here now.
And Malaysia, of course, wants a collective Southeast Asia tariff.
Yeah, so Malaysia's in a very interesting spot for this. It's hasn't been too hardly hit by the tariffs, but it is this year's chair of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So it very badly wants Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim to take the lead and to offer a regional response. So for the countries that are a bit worse off, so Vietnam, Cambodia, that might not be the best option. They might need to go it alone and see what they can do. But for countries like Indonesia, where the tariffs aren't great, but could be way worse, that might be the best way to go.
Now, we've been reporting in our headlines that South Korea is probably going to set the date for a June the 3rd presidential election. What more can you tell us on that?
This must be very, very exciting for South Korean voters. So the courts have set it June 3rd, but it needs to be approved by the cabinet. That's expected to happen tomorrow, and that will trigger the whole kit and caboodle. Everybody will need to resign if they're public servants and they want to get involved. So it'll take about 60 days to get the process moving, but it does bring to an end a very, very dark and dramatic period for South Korea. The opposition leader, Lee Jae-myung, is the front runner at the moment from the Democratic Party, but there's certainly a lot of people that be keen to put their hands up, I imagine, after the drama of the last few months.
And do you think we're likely to see major political change there?
I'm not too sure. I know that there is definitely a desire and appetite for it in a lot of circles who have seen last year's aborted martial law as just another incident in a long line of things holding back South Korea at this stage. But with so much going on internationally and throughout the region, stability and a safe pair of hands might be the answer for a lot of South Korean voters.
Well, it's wonderful to see that South Koreans haven't lost their sense of humour over this, because they're actually, those who've called for the removal of Yoon Suk-yeol are celebrating the confirmation of his impeachment with a very humorous visual pun online. Tell us this.
I love this. This is one of those great puns that you can only get with such fun languages as Korean. So, people that are not fans of Yoon Suk-yeol, who was, of course, formally impeached last week, have been celebrating with cup noodles with green onions sprinkled on top, which when you combine the noodles, myeon, with pa for green onions, that becomes pamyeon. And apologies to all Korean speakers who've heard me butcher that, but that translates to removal. So it's a bit of a snack and a bit of a pun to say you're out of here.
Excellent. Erin, thank you very much for joining us. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, Ed Stocker, Monocle's Europe editor-at-large, joins us now from Salone del Mobile in Milan, which begins in earnest on Tuesday. Welcome to you, Ed. I understand, though, that there have already been some events over the weekend. So how are things shaping up?
Yeah, good morning to you. I'm standing on Via Solferino in the Brera area, which, of course, one of the main parts of Milan that gets taken over for Design Week. And yeah, things have already kicked off. This is probably, I'm based here in Milan. This is probably the busiest week in the calendar. It's just amazing to see all the people who come from around the world to be part of this. And of course, we've got a big team presence in Milan. But yeah, you're right, Georgina. Lots of events have already taken place. Some for the press started even last week, sort of precursor to some of the stuff that's happening this week. But I've already been, running around. I was at Piscina Cozzi, which is the amazing rationalist swimming pool on Saturday night, 6 a.m. glass, a young collective of glass designers who take glass from Murano and give it a kind of contemporary twist, had their debut show, a solo show, in what was a former public washroom in the swimming pool, converted into an amazing space. I was at Nilofar Depot yesterday morning, checking out the design there, this incredible depot space, a little bit out of the center of town. And then I headed to Alcova, which of course is this sort of upcoming design platform that has 4 spaces, again, slightly outside Milan, in a former greenhouse, is one of the spaces, a former villa. Always an incredible show. So I was running around that yesterday. And then we met up with the team, with Nick and Grace yesterday evening. went for some dinner and checked out maybe a party. But feeling fresh this morning, Georgina, of course, ready for the day.
You know, I'm not sure I believe you if you met up with Nick Moniz, who has a reputation for taking his shirt off very publicly. Did he keep it on?
Well, he did. A bit of a wind whipped up yesterday, actually. It was been very warm here, and then suddenly it got really cold. So I think he might have been a little cold. I don't think it was shirt off weather. Maybe towards the end of the week when it's getting warmer again.
You sound like you're on the street. Where are you on your way to?
I am. I'm about to do an interview with David Rockwell, who is, of course, this huge design presence with. He has offices in New York, Los Angeles, and also here in Europe in Madrid. He's got an installation on Via Solferino called Casa Cork. So he's basically. Well, I'm going to find out more about it in a few moments when I see it and interview him. But he's basically talking about cork as a material, how versatile it is, of course, how it can be very sustainable as well. So that's one of the interviews I'm going to be doing that will be on Monocle Radio very soon. I have to send it today, in fact. And then running around and seeing some more previews. Today is traditionally the sort of press day. So there'll be a lot of previews to run around and catch up and see.
And of course, the whole thing kicks off officially tomorrow. So what are we expecting this year?
Well, yeah, of course, you've got, there's two sides to this, really, aren't there? There's Salone del Mobile, which, of course, is the trade fair, which is in a trade hall, which is where, obviously, a lot of buyers go to. It's very serious stuff. You have lots of big brands there. So that's always interesting to check out from a sort of business point of view. There's also a set of talks there. We've got Euroluce, which is focused on lighting that comes back every couple of years. And then you have all the events that are taking place, like the one I'm about to go to on Via Solferino, that take place in the centre of and there's just so much stuff, There's so much to see. I feel like it gets busier and busier every year, but it's also such a nice time for someone who lives in Milan because you have people from the design community and not just from also fashion and lifestyle, lots of different sectors who come to Milan. People who I used to know from New York, where I lived before moving to Milan, are here. So it becomes, Milan's already become a much more international city over the last few years, but it becomes even more so during this week. So it's so lovely to see, the team from London at Monocle and people from all over the world who drop in on Milan to, enjoy a week of amazing design, Georgina.
Absolutely. So, Ed, we've only got a minute left or so. Would you just give us a quick roundup of Monocle events there this week?
Yeah, you can go onto our website, actually, Monocle, and look at the events section. But we have tonight an event with Cupra, not far from here, on Corso Como, and then we have Design Singapore Council on Wednesday night. So check out, I know they're pretty packed, but there may be a few spaces if you go onto the website. Hopefully you can join us.
And parties?
But a lot. I think Nick Moniz might be your man for that. I don't know, if he's not too hungover this morning, maybe he can check in with you at some point and give you the lowdown. Him and Grace, I'll leave it to them. I snuck off early last night, so perhaps I'm feeling fresher than they are. Who knows?
Who knows? Ed Stocker, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on The Globalist. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks very much to our producers, Anita Riotta and Chris Chermak, our researcher, Francesca Gilks, and our studio manager, Mariella Bevan. So after the headlines, there's more music on the way. We've also got a number of different programmes coming your way. The Menu with Chiara Romella. We have The Big Interview, and we also have The Foreign Desk. So don't miss all of those programmes. And if you do, remember, you can always listen back to them wherever you get your podcasts at your leisure. The briefing is live at midday in London, and The Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.